Jacksonville, Florida, Sunday, May the 7th, 2000. 64-year-old tourist Mary Ann Stevens is shot dead in front of her husband, 65-year-old James Stevens, at a Southside Ramada Inn motel. In less than 2 hours, the police have their suspect, a then 15-year-old named Brenton Butler. Open and shut case, right? After all, Brenton was positively identified by the victim's husband at the scene of the crime. In this episode, we will go through the heart-wrenching story of a young boy accused of a cold-blooded murder. We will look at how police corruption and incompetence led to a young man being charged with murder, and how one public defense attorney strived for justice. Come on a journey with me through this controversial murder case that will leave you questioning the criminal justice system. Mary Ann and her husband James were visiting Florida and staying at the Ramada Inn motel. On that fateful Sunday morning, having just finished their breakfast at around 7:30 a.m., the couple were making their way back to their room when a young black man approached them and demanded Mary Ann's purse. Almost instantly, the suspect shot Mary Ann in the face with a bullet piercing through the bridge of her nose. Mary Ann was left for dead, and the shooter ran away with her purse. When police arrived at the scene, the victim was confirmed deceased. James Stevens described the shooter as being a skinny black man between the age of 20 to 25, standing at 6 feet tall and wearing a hat. Incidentally, Brenton was 4 inches shorter and 10 to 15 years younger than the description provided by James Stevens, the only eyewitness to the murder. Just 1 mile from the Ramada Inn motel at around 9 a.m. that morning, 2 hours after the fatal shooting, 15-year-old Brenton had just left his home and was on his way to Blockbusters to complete a job application. Brenton's journey took him past the scene of the crime, and as he was walking by, one of the police officers said to another, quote, "Well, there is a young black man right there. Could be him. Could be anybody." One of the officers immediately approached Brenton and asked if he had seen or knew anything about the murder. Brenton replied he did not. However, the officer asked Brenton to accompany him a little closer to the crime scene. It was at this very moment when the young black man was placed inside the back of a police car. James Stevens took one look and claimed Brenton was the man who shot his wife. When police asked James if he was certain, James replied, quote, "I wouldn't send an innocent man to jail." James Stevens' identification started the harrowing tale of racial bias, coercion, and police corruption. Brenton's arrest and the subsequent investigation was marred by racial profiling and preconceived notions about his guilt. It's a stark reminder of the challenges faced by some within the criminal justice system. By 12 p.m. on the day of the murder, the Jacksonville police had started their interrogation of Brenton. Brenton told the officers that he had nothing to do with the murder and that he was at home at the time of the shooting. However, the officers refused to believe him, instead telling Brenton that an eyewitness placed him at the scene of the crime. Brenton was kept in a locked and sound-resistant room. He was refused his right to speak with an attorney or his parents. One of the detectives told Brenton he would arrange for an attorney, but for whatever reason, failed to do this. Later that day, Detective Michael Glover, son of the then Sheriff Nat Glover, was brought in to extract a confession from Brenton. Glover, a black man himself, claimed Brenton hugged him and said, quote, "Boy, am I glad to see you." According to Glover, he asked Brenton if this was an accident, to which a tearful Brenton replied that it was. Glover also claims that Brenton admitted to throwing the gun into the woods close to the murder scene. At around 6 p.m. that day, Detective Glover took Brenton out to the woods to locate the murder weapon. Once they arrived at the woods, it was dusk, and Detective Glover took a chained Brenton deep into the woods, while the other detectives searched the entrance to the wooded area. It is unclear why the officers didn't wait for daylight to search the woods. rather than looking for the weapon in partial darkness. Away from prying eyes, a chained Brenton was hit twice in the stomach and once in the face by Glover. Brenton was taken back to the interrogation room, and it was the turn of Detective Dwayne Darnell to get Brenton to confess. According to Detective Darnell, Brenton said that he wanted to present his side of the story. It was at this moment that Detective Darnell got some paper and wrote down Brenton's alleged confession. According to state prosecution, Brenton provided an oral confession in the presence of two detectives, as well as signing the confession paper drafted by Detective Darnell. Brenton claims that he was threatened, with detectives holding their pistol in their holsters and making threats against Brenton's family. After hours of interrogation and a violent trip to the woods, a physically and mentally broken Butler signed the confession paper written by Detective Darnell. On May the 8th, one day after the murder, at around 6:30 a.m., a member of the public found a purse in a dumpster. Having heard about the murder on the news, the individual immediately called the police. Inside the purse, there was an ID card belonging to Mary Ann Stevens along with $1,200. The dumpster where Mary Ann's items were found was located around 9 miles from the scene of the crime, on the north side of Jacksonville. This should have raised alarm bells for the detectives. How was it possible for Brenton Butler to dump the purse 9 miles away from the crime scene, keeping in mind that he did not drive? What's more, it would not make much sense for Brenton to walk so far out and inexplicably walk all the way back to the crime scene. When the member of the public reported finding the purse, the police went to retrieve the item and they accused the member of the public of stealing the murder weapon. The police also did not bother to bring along a forensic analyst to lift any fingerprints or search for DNA. This will prove crucial and show the level of incompetence in their investigations. Pat McGinnis was the public defender for Brenton alongside Ann Finnell. McGinnis was a no-nonsense attorney who fought hard for Brenton. Throughout the trial, McGinnis clashed with the detectives on numerous occasions and often invoked the wrath of the state prosecution team. Referring to his confrontational approach at times with the detectives who took the stand, McGinnis said, quote, "If a dog wets your carpet and you don't discipline him, it will continue to wet your carpet." In other words, McGinnis was going to reprimand and point out the lies that were being told by these officers against Brenton. Very quickly, Pat McGinnis came to the understanding that this was a gang of corrupt officers who were out to get Brenton. In a fiery cross-examination, Pat McGinnis asked Detective Michael Glover, who played football in school, whether he, quote, "hit people well and hit people hard." When cross-examining Detective James Williams, the detective was forced into admitting that the only person thoroughly interviewed for this crime was Brenton. The detective had not bothered to interview the husband James Stevens, nor the family members of Brenton, who could have provided an alibi. Police did not find a gun, a hat, or the purse when they arrested Brenton Butler. They also failed to get a search warrant for Brenton's house to try and find any evidence to link him to the crime. When they did find the purse through a member of the public, no forensic analyst went to the scene to assist. Pat McGinnis questioned Detective Williams on whether Williams thought he did a thorough and competent job during the investigation, thereby putting doubt into the jury's mind on how badly this criminal investigation was handled by Jacksonville police. Pat McGinnis also cast doubt on the alleged confession obtained by Detective Darnell. McGinnis pointed out that the detective wrote down the confession in his own style and using his own vocabulary. When McGinnis asked the detective why he did not get Brenton to write his own confession, the detective speculated that Brenton was just being lazy. The detective also admitted to writing down what he believed to have taken place and reading it back to Brenton to get his agreement. The detective also failed to verify anything that was recorded in this alleged confession. At trial, Brenton testified that Detective Glover started off as being nice to him in the interrogation room, making small talk about sports. However, Brenton claims Glover became very nasty very quickly and started accusing Brenton of the crime and shouting, quote, "It's N-word like you that make me mad these days." Brenton said he was forced to go out to the woods by the detectives looking for a gun that he knew nothing about. Brenton also denied hugging Detective Glover and making any statements about being glad to see another black person. Pat McGinnis was on a mission to expose police corruption and, more importantly, provide justice to a young man who was facing spending the rest of his life in prison. Brenton was fortunate to have a shining star as a public defender, one that was able to tower above the powerful state and law enforcement officials to bring hope to Brenton and his family. During the closing argument, Pat McGinnis pleaded with the jury to spare Brenton from injustice. McGinnis asked the jury whether they can be satisfied with the investigations that took place. Ending his closing argument, McGinnis said, quote, "Winston Churchill used to say, the quality of a nation's civilization can be measured by the methods its police use in enforcement of criminal laws. I suggest to you by that yardstick, we're in deep trouble." Following the conclusion of the trial, the jury deliberated for a mere 45 minutes and reached the verdict of not guilty. Brenton and his family cried tears of joy, and Pat McGinnis broke into the smallest of smiles. In January 2001, almost 8 months after the murder, Pat McGinnis received a tip that Juan Curtis, 22 years old, confessed to a jail inmate that he killed Mary Ann Stevens. Curtis is alleged to have told the inmate that he shot the victim after a cup of coffee was thrown at him during the robbery. In March 2001, police re-examined the purse and found a fingerprint matching Juan Curtis. An accomplice to the murder, 21-year-old Jamel Williams, confessed to the crime and testified against his co-defendant. Williams received a 10-year sentence, while Curtis was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. After the case, a grand jury investigation was launched. The grand jury criticized the prosecutor and the police for its handling of the case. Detective Michael Glover retired soon after, whilst Detective Dwayne Darnell and Detective James Williams were removed from their positions. Brenton's family sued the city, seeking $8.5 million in a civil lawsuit. The Butler family accepted a $775,000 settlement, citing the fear of a lengthy court process and wanting to close this difficult chapter in their lives. Thank you for tuning in to this powerful and thought-provoking case, one that really makes you think about the impact of racial bias, wrongful convictions, and the importance of having strong attorneys in our justice system. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more similar content, please subscribe and hit the like button. Please leave your comments on what you thought about the case and any questions or feedback you may have for me. So, until next time.